They say a wedding is the happiest day of a woman's life. But as my sister's new husband stormed out of their reception, leaving her crying at the head table, I knew this wasn't about happiness. It was about justice. The perfect marriage she had built was a house of cards, and the gift in my hands was the gust of wind that would bring it all crashing down. Everyone was staring at me, wondering what I had done. The truth is, I hadn't done anything yet. I just gave them a gift. The story of why that little box held so much power. Well, that story started a year ago, on the day my own life was ruined. My name is Sandra Dorr. I'm 32 years old, and until today, I was known as the quiet sister, the good daughter, the one who never made any trouble. I work as a librarian in our small Ohio town, a job that suits my personality. I like order, rules, and predictable endings. But life doesn't always follow the rules of a storybook. Sometimes, the villain isn't a dragon or a witch. Sometimes, she's the person you grew up with, the one who shares your blood, the one you're supposed to trust with your deepest secrets. For me, the villain was my younger sister, Amelia. The first blow came when I saw her walking down the aisle a few hours ago. It wasn't just that she looked beautiful. She always did. It was what she was wearing. The dress. It was an ivory A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves and tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. It was my dress. Not a similar one. Not a copy. It was the exact dress I had spent months designing with a local seamstress for my own wedding. The wedding that never happened. My heart stopped beating for a second as I watched her glide towards her groom, looking like an angel in the life she had stolen from me. I remember my hands shaking in my lap. How could she? I had kept the dress perfectly preserved in a garment bag in my old closet at our parents' house. After my fiancé, Liam, called off our wedding just a month before the big day, I couldn't even look at it. The sight was too painful. Our mother must have given it to her. When I confronted my mom before the ceremony, she just waved her hand and said, "Don't be dramatic, Sandra. It was a shame to let such a beautiful dress go to waste." A shame? It was my heart, stitched into fabric and lace. But the dress was only part of the betrayal. It was the symbol of everything Amelia had taken from me. As I sat there during the ceremony, a cold calm washed over me. The hurt I had felt for a year began to harden into something else, something sharp and focused. I wasn't the sad, heartbroken sister anymore. I was a woman with a purpose. I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. She was marrying a good man, Mark, who thought she was the sweetest, most innocent person in the world. He deserved to know exactly who he was pledging his life to. So, during the reception, when the time came for gifts, I walked up to the head table. I wasn't holding a toaster or a set of fancy towels. My gift was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, wrapped in shimmering gold paper with a perfect white bow. Amelia smiled at me, a fake, sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Sandra. You didn't have to," she said, reaching for it. Mark, her new husband, looked on, smiling warmly. He had no idea what was coming. He was a nice guy, a dentist from the next town over. He didn't deserve to be caught in this web of lies. "I wanted to," I said, my voice steady. "This is something I think you both need to see. It's a piece of the past, and a look into your future." Mark chuckled, thinking I was being sentimental. But Amelia's smile faltered. She knew me better than that. She saw the look in my eyes, a look she hadn't seen before. I handed the box to Mark, not her. "Open it," I said softly. "It's really for you." He looked confused but began to unwrap the gift, and with every tear of the paper, the air in the room grew thicker. This is the moment everything changed. This is the moment a year of pain finally found its voice. What I did next, some people will call it cruel. They'll call me a monster for ruining my own sister's wedding day. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have stayed silent and watched her live the life that was supposed to be yours, with everyone thinking she was a saint? Or would you have found a way to make the truth explode, no matter how many people got hurt in the blast? I chose the explosion. Mark finally got the box open. He lifted the lid and looked inside. His smile vanished. His face went from confusion to shock, and then to a deep, dark rage I had never seen in such a gentle man. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled with a disgust so pure it made her flinch. He didn't shout at first. He just whispered one word. "Why?" Then he threw the small object from the box onto the table, stood up, and walked out without another word. The door slammed, and the silence he left behind was deafening. Now, everyone is looking at me. At the box. At the tiny thing that now lies on the white tablecloth next to the wedding cake. It's so small, but it holds a secret big enough to destroy everything. Amelia is finally looking at it, and a choked sob escapes her lips. She knows she's been caught. The question you're probably asking is the same one on every guest's face right now. What was in the box? I promise you, the answer is so much more shocking than you can ever imagine. Stick with me, and I'll tell you the whole story. I'll tell you why this positive test, dated 1 year ago, had my ex-fiancé's name written on it. If you're ready to hear the truth, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The story is just getting started. A secret is a heavy thing. For a whole year, I carried this one around like a stone in my heart. Now, seeing it out in the open, I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. The silence in the room was louder than any music. My mother rushed to Amelia's side, wrapping an arm around her shaking shoulders. She didn't look at her crying daughter though. Her eyes, cold and full of fire, were locked on me. "You are a monster," she mouthed, her words a silent poison. A monster? Maybe. But they were the ones who created me. Just 1 year ago, my life was a different color. It was bright and full of hope. I was engaged to Liam, a man I had loved since college. He was a builder, with strong hands and a smile that could make you feel safe. We were saving up for a little house on the edge of town, with a porch swing and a yard for a dog we'd name Gus. I had my dress, the caterer was booked, and our invitations were ready to be mailed. I believed in happily ever after. I was a fool. My sister, Amelia, was supposed to be my maid of honor. She was always there, our little shadow. She'd come over to our small apartment with pizza, claiming she was bored, and would stay for hours, laughing with Liam. I thought it was sweet. I thought we were all best friends. "You're so lucky, Sandra," she'd say, watching Liam fix a leaky faucet. "He's perfect." I see it now, the hunger in her eyes when she looked at him. But back then, I just saw my adoring little sister. I was blind to the snake I had invited into my home. The day my world cracked open was a Tuesday. I had gone to my parents' house to pick up some old photo albums for our wedding slideshow. Amelia's room was a mess, and a small trash can by her desk was overflowing. As I pushed a stray wrapper back in, I saw it. A little white and pink stick. My hands started to tremble as I pulled it out. Pregnant. The word swam before my eyes. Then I saw the date she had written on it in tiny, neat letters. It was from 2 weeks before. 2 weeks, right around the time Liam started being quiet, distant, and working late almost every night. Back in the reception hall, the whispers grew into a loud buzz. My father, a man who rarely showed emotion, walked over to me. His face was grey with shame. "Sandra, that's enough," he said, his voice low and firm. "We're leaving. You will apologize to your sister and to Mark's family." He tried to take my arm, to lead me away like a naughty child. I pulled away. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly strong. "I'm not done." I had spent a year being silent. I had spent my life making myself small to let Amelia shine. Tonight, that was over. There was more to the story that they needed to hear. That night, after I found the test, I drove back to my apartment. I didn't cry. I felt strangely calm. I put the test on the kitchen table and waited for Liam to come home. When he walked in, whistling, my heart broke all over again. He saw the test and his face went white. He tried to lie, of course. He said it was a friend's, that Amelia was just scared and confided in him. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He finally broke down, telling me it was a horrible mistake that happened one night when he drove her home. He begged me to forgive him. The next day, I confronted Amelia. I expected tears, apologies, shame. I got none of that. We met at a small coffee shop, and she looked me right in the eye, without a hint of regret. "I love him, Sandra," she said, as if that explained everything. "And he loves me. He was just with you because it was comfortable." Every word was a knife, twisting into the wound Liam had already made. She told me she was going to have the baby and that Liam was going to leave me for her. That was the moment I realized my sister didn't have a heart. She had a black hole where it should have been. So, I picked up the DJ's microphone from a nearby table. The sudden feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone jump. All eyes were on me. Amelia looked up, her face streaked with tears and terror. "I'm not here to ruin a wedding," I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall. "I'm here to stop a lie. A marriage should be built on truth, but the foundation of this one was built on my broken heart." I looked at Amelia. "Some of you are wondering about the baby. Don't worry, there is no baby. She took care of that. Because she didn't want the baby. She just wanted my fiancé." The guests gasped. My parents looked like they were going to faint. I had laid the ugly truth out for everyone to see. My work was done. I placed the microphone back on the table, turned around, and began to walk towards the exit. I could feel hundreds of eyes on my back, a mix of pity, anger, and shock. I didn't care. For the first time in a year, I felt like I could breathe again. I was almost at the door, ready to leave this nightmare behind me and start whatever came next. But just as my hand touched the cold metal of the door handle, it swung open from the outside. It was Mark, the groom. He had come back. He walked straight past his crying bride, past her shocked parents, and came right up to me, blocking my exit. His face wasn't filled with rage anymore. It was calm, calculating, and his eyes were full of a strange, unsettling light. He looked down at me and spoke, his voice low enough so only I could hear. "The test isn't the whole story, is it? You wouldn't have done all this just for that. What else don't I know?" When Mark asked me that question, I saw the last bit of hope leave his eyes. He wasn't just a groom whose bride had a dark past. He was a man standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing the ground beneath his feet was never solid to begin with. He knew there was more, and the look on his face told me he needed to know everything, no matter how much it hurt. He deserved the full story, not just the one chapter one had revealed. The real betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a plan, carefully built over months. Before I could even answer him, Amelia scrambled over to us, grabbing his arm. Her beautiful white dress was wrinkled, her makeup smeared with tears. "Mark, baby, please," she cried, her voice desperate. "Don't listen to her. She's always been jealous of me. She's twisting things, she's lying to hurt us." Mark didn't even look at her. He gently removed her hand from his arm as if he were touching something unclean. His eyes stayed locked on mine. The trust between them wasn't just broken, it had been burned to ashes. Then, Mark said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I knew something was off," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For months, there have been secrets. She would take phone calls in the other room and delete her call history. And the money. Last month, $5,000 disappeared from our joint savings account. She told me it was for a wedding vendor who needed cash." He finally looked at Amelia, his expression cold as ice. "There was no vendor, was there, Amelia?" The story was starting to unravel, and a new, darker thread had just appeared. After I found out about the affair a year ago, I didn't just curl up and disappear. For a week, I did. I cried until I had no tears left. Then, a cold anger settled in. I needed to understand. I needed to know if Liam was right, if it was really a one-time mistake, or if Amelia was right, that he had secretly loved her all along. I started looking for answers. I became a detective in the ruins of my own life. I knew there had to be more clues, more evidence of their lies, and I was determined to find them. My first breakthrough came from the place you'd least expect it, Amelia's childhood bookshelf. Tucked behind her old fairy tale books, I found her journals from the past 2 years. Her handwriting, once so loopy and innocent, now looked like angry scratches on the page. I read for hours, my heart pounding with every page I turned. She wrote about me and Liam, about how perfect we were, and how much she hated it. She wrote about her obsession with him, detailing a cold, calculated plan to tear us apart and make him hers. It was worse than I could have imagined. The affair hadn't been a single mistake. It had been going on for nearly 6 months before I found out. They met in cheap motels on days Liam was supposed to be working late. He sent her poems, the same poems he used to send me. The journals described how they would laugh together about how clueless I was, how I believed every lie he told me. Liam hadn't just cheated on me. He had mocked me, betrayed our entire history, and she had encouraged every second of it. That was the real poison. Back at the reception, I took a deep breath. Mark deserved to know what kind of people he had gotten involved with. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice clear and steady. The pregnancy test wasn't the whole story. It wasn't even the beginning. I turned my gaze to my sister, who was now trembling with fear. "Why don't you ask her about that $5,000? Ask her who she gave that money to. And while you're at it, ask her why my ex-fiancé Liam packed his bags and left town last week without saying goodbye to anyone." A wave of gasps went through the crowd. This was new information for everyone, including my parents, whose faces were now masks of horror. Liam was gone? And Amelia had paid him? The puzzle pieces were clicking into place for everyone in the room, forming a picture that was uglier than anything they could have imagined. Amelia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was trapped. Her web of lies had just become her cage, and everyone was watching. She had nowhere left to run. I felt a strange mix of power and pain. I was finally telling my story, but in doing so, I was tearing my family apart in front of 100 witnesses. I looked at my mother and father. For the first time, I think they finally saw Amelia for who she really was. They saw the manipulator, not the victim. They had spent their whole lives protecting their precious, perfect younger daughter, and now they were watching her true self be exposed. Their punishment was having to watch this, knowing they had helped create the monster their other daughter had to destroy. Mark's voice cut through the silence, dangerously quiet. "Where is he, Amelia?" he asked, his voice flat. She just shook her head, sobbing. He turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Where did he go?" I pulled my phone from my small clutch purse. The screen lit up my face. "I'm not sure where he is now," I said calmly, navigating to my video gallery. "But before he left, he sent me something. A confession. He said he was sorry and wanted me to know the whole truth." I held up the phone. "This video explains everything, Mark, including what your $5,000 really paid for." My thumb hovered over the play button. In that 1 second before I pressed play, I held all the power. I could have stopped. I could have walked away and let them all wonder forever. But Mark's eyes told me he needed this. He needed to see the truth for himself, no matter how ugly. And I needed him to see it, too. I needed one other person in the world to know that I wasn't the crazy, jealous sister. I was the survivor of a war nobody else knew was happening. My sister's last bit of hope died when she saw Mark step between us. With a final, desperate cry, Amelia lunged for my phone. "Don't you dare ruin my life," she shrieked. But Mark was faster. He put out his arm, blocking her path without even looking at her. His movement was calm, but final. It was a wall she could not pass. "I want to see it, Amelia," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I want to see what my $5,000 bought." Defeated, she sank to the floor, her sobs echoing in the dead quiet of the room. I pressed play and turned the screen so only Mark could see. The video flickered to life. It was Liam. He was sitting in the driver's seat of his truck, parked somewhere dark. He looked terrible, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't shaved in days. He wasn't the charming, confident man I was once going to marry. He was a ghost. "Sandra," he began, his voice raspy. "If you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. I had to leave. I couldn't live with the lies anymore." He took a deep, shaky breath. "The money mark is missing. Amelia gave it to me. But it wasn't a gift. It was blackmail." Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. Blackmail. I could see the question in his eyes. What could be worse than a secret affair and a lost baby? Liam's voice continued from the phone, thick with shame. "After she took care of the pregnancy, she told me it was a miscarriage. But I found out the truth. And I found out something else. Something she did years ago, back in high school, to a girl named Sarah Jenkins. I can't say what it was, but it was bad. She ruined that girl's life to get something she wanted. I realized that what she did to you wasn't the first time. A new name. A new victim. Sarah Jenkins. I didn't know who that was, but it was clear that my sister's cruelty had a history. The video wasn't over." Liam leaned closer to his phone's camera, his eyes pleading. "But that's not why I'm running, Sandra. The money was to buy my silence about her past, and to pay for my help in her next plan." He paused, and his next words made my blood run cold. "She wasn't done with you. She wasn't satisfied just taking me. She wanted to destroy your life completely, so you'd have nothing left." The video ended, leaving Liam's terrified face frozen on the screen. I lowered the phone. Mark stood completely still for a long time, just staring at the spot where the video had been playing. The color had drained from his face. He slowly turned his head and looked at Amelia, who was still crumpled on the floor. He wasn't looking at the woman he had married a few hours ago. He was looking at a stranger, a monster wearing her face. Amelia just kept whispering, he's lying, but her words were weak, pathetic. The truth had been too loud. I looked over at my parents. My father was helping my mother into a chair, his face a mask of stone. But my mother, her expression had changed. The anger was gone. In its place was a look of horrified understanding. She looked from the sobbing mess of her favorite daughter on the floor to me, standing by the door. And for the first time in my life, I saw shame in her eyes. Shame for what she had ignored, for the daughter she had enabled, and for the one she had failed to protect. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The guests didn't know what to do. The silence was broken by the sound of chairs scraping as people began to quietly get up and leave, not wanting to witness another second of this disaster. Mark's parents walked over to him. His mother, a kind woman with tears in her eyes, put a gentle hand on his arm. His father, however, walked right up to my parents. "I think you owe my son, and his entire family, an apology for the viper you raised," he said, his voice booming through the hall. Mark, however, seemed to find a sudden strength. He walked past his parents, past mine, and straight to the microphone. He tapped it, and the sound echoed. I want to thank you all for coming," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "And I want to apologize for this. The wedding is over." He looked directly at Amelia, who stared back with wide, tear-filled eyes. "The marriage is over. My lawyer will be sending the annulment papers to your parents' house." With that, he put the microphone down and the final nail in the coffin of their union. He walked back towards me, his duty done. The remaining guests watched our every move. He stopped in front of me at the doorway, the cool night air from outside hitting my face. He looked exhausted, like a soldier who had just survived a terrible battle. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. But there was still a question burning in his eyes. "The video," he said softly. "Liam said she was planning something else. Something to destroy you completely." He looked deep into my eyes. "You know what it was, don't you, Sandra? What else was she going to do?" His question hung in the air, heavier than any secret I had revealed so far. He was right. The story wasn't just about what Amelia had already done. It was about what she was going to do next. The thought of it still made me feel cold inside. This wasn't just about a stolen fiancé or a ruined wedding anymore. It was darker than that. Looking into Mark's tired eyes, I knew I had to tell him. He wasn't just a victim in this story. He was almost an accomplice, and he deserved to know how close he had come to being part of something truly evil. Yes, I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. I know what the plan was. But not here. I glanced back at the wreckage of the reception. My parents were arguing with Mark's parents. Amelia was still on the floor, being comforted by a few of her bridesmaids who looked just as confused as everyone else. This wasn't the place. Let's go somewhere else, I said, my voice gaining a little strength. We can go to the diner down the street. I'll tell you everything. Mark simply nodded, his face grim. He turned and said a few quiet words to his parents, then followed me out the door, leaving his old life behind. The 5-minute walk to the 24-hour diner felt like an hour. We didn't speak. The sounds of the night, a distant siren, crickets chirping, were the only things that filled the silence. We slid into a worn-out vinyl booth in the back corner of the empty diner. A waitress poured us coffee without asking. When she left, Mark looked at me across the table, his eyes full of pain and exhaustion. "Okay, Sandra," he said softly. "Tell me. What else was she going to do?" His voice was steady, but I could see the fear behind it. He was afraid of the answer. I took a sip of the hot coffee, the warmth doing little to stop the chill I felt. "After Liam left, he didn't just send me that video," I began. "He left a package for me with a friend. It had copies of text messages, bank statements, and a letter explaining Amelia's next phase." I saw Mark brace himself. "She wasn't just going to marry you, Mark. She was going to use your good name, your clean record, your money, to finish destroying me." This was the hardest part to say out loud. Liam's letter explained it all. Amelia had a plan. A month after the wedding, she was going to accidentally discover that I had been embezzling money from the town library where I worked. Of course, I hadn't stolen a dime, but she had a way to make it look like I did. She had spent months learning the library's accounting system, waiting for the right moment to move money around and create a false trail. A trail that would lead directly to my bank account. The plan was not just to hurt me, it was to send me to prison. Mark stared at me, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. "Prison? Why? What could she possibly gain from that?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of confusion and rage. "It wasn't about gaining anything," I explained. "It was about leaving me with nothing. With a criminal record, I'd lose my job, my home, my reputation. No one would ever believe me over her, the perfect, sweet Amelia. She wanted me erased. She told Liam that with me gone, there would be no more reminders of her past mistakes. She could finally be the good daughter, the only daughter." The texts between Amelia and Liam were sickening. She described her plan in gleeful detail, calling it her masterpiece. She had figured out how to use your online banking password, Mark, to transfer the money she would steal from the library into an account she planned to create under my name. She needed Liam's help to set up the fake account. That's what the $5,000 was for. His silence and his help. But at the last second, his conscience, or maybe his fear, won out. He took the money and ran, but not before he sent me all the evidence. "So, the wedding dress," Mark said, connecting the dots. "That wasn't just her being cheap or insensitive. It was a message." I nodded, a single tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. "It was the first step," I said, my voice cracking. "Wearing my dress was her way of showing me that she could take anything she wanted from me. My dress, my fiancé, my family's love, and soon, my freedom. It was a promise of what was to come. She was telling me, I own your life now." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her evil filling the space between us. Mark finally looked up from his coffee cup, his eyes hard as steel. "This Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice different now, colder. "The girl from high school that Liam mentioned in the video. What did Amelia do to her?" I looked at him, surprised he remembered the name amidst all the chaos. I realized then that Mark wasn't just a victim. He was a man who needed all the facts. He needed to understand the monster he almost married. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know," I admitted, and it felt like a failure. Liam's video was the first time I'd ever heard her name. I went to a different high school than Amelia, so I don't know who she is or what happened. I looked at him, a new, terrifying thought forming in my mind. But if what she did to that girl was bad enough for Liam to use as blackmail, then my story might not be the worst thing Amelia has ever done. A new door had opened, leading to a past that was even darker than I knew. And I had a feeling that finding out what happened to Sarah Jenkins was now the most important thing in the world. Sometimes, a story you think is over is actually the beginning of a much bigger, much darker one. Sitting there in that diner, I realized my revenge on Amelia wasn't an ending. It was an opening. It was a key that had unlocked a door to a room I never knew was there. And inside that room was another victim, another story that had been buried for years. The thought that my sister's cruelty had a history, that I wasn't the first person whose life she had tried to ruin, filled me with a strange and terrible new purpose. Mark was the one who said it first. He pushed his coffee cup aside and leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "We have to find her, Sandra," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was filled with a hard certainty that surprised me. He wasn't just the heartbroken groom anymore. He was a man who had been sold a lie and was now determined to uncover the entire truth, no matter where it led. Whatever Amelia did to that girl, she deserves to know that the truth is finally coming out. He was right. This was bigger than me now. My own pain felt small in that moment. What if this Sarah Jenkins had been suffering in silence for over a decade? What if everyone thought she was the liar, the crazy one, just like they would have thought about me? My revenge was no longer just about settling my own score. It was about stopping Amelia for good. It was about making sure she could never hurt anyone ever again. We were no longer just two betrayed people in a diner. We were a team with a mission. But where do you even start looking for a ghost? Mark pulled out his phone, his fingers immediately flying across the screen. "Let's check the obvious places first. Social media." He typed a name, adding our hometown and the high school's name. A few profiles popped up, but the pictures were of strangers, people from different states, different lives. "It's a common name. This could take forever," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. It was clear she wasn't living an open, public life online. Or maybe she had changed her name. Maybe she had disappeared on purpose. Just as we were about to hit a dead end, a memory sparked in my mind. A dusty, forgotten corner of my parents' house. "The yearbooks," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Amelia's old high school yearbooks. They're on the top shelf of the closet in her old bedroom. They have to be. My mom never throws anything away." The thought of going back to that house, the scene of the crime, sent a shiver down my spine. But it was our only lead. I had to go back inside the lion's den. Mark must have seen the fear on my face. "I'll go with you," he said, leaving no room for argument. "You shouldn't have to face them alone." I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought tears to my eyes. A few hours ago, this man was a stranger marrying my sister. Now, he felt like the only ally I had in the world. We left the diner and walked back into the rising sun, towards the house where all my nightmares had been born, but where we hoped to find the key to someone else's. The house was eerily quiet when we arrived. The party was over. All that was left were stacks of rental chairs on the lawn and deflated balloons hanging from the porch, like sad, tired ghosts. I used my old key, and the lock turned with a familiar click. The air inside was thick with tension. We could hear the low murmur of the television from my parents' room. We crept up the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot. Amelia's room was exactly as I remembered it, a pink and white time capsule from her perfect childhood. The yearbooks were right where I said they would be. We pulled them down, dust motes dancing in the morning light that streamed through the window. We found the right year and started flipping through the pages of smiling, hopeful teenagers. And then, we found her. Sarah Jenkins. She had a kind smile, bright eyes, and a mouthful of braces. Right next to her picture, in my sister's loopy handwriting, was a message. To my best friend, Sarah. We'll be besties forever. Never change. Love. Amelia. The lie was so blatant, it felt like a scream from the page. We scanned the page, looking for clues, but there was nothing. It was just a photo in a book. Disappointed, I started to close the yearbook. As I did, a small, folded square of yellowed paper fluttered out from between the pages and landed on the floor. It was a newspaper clipping, old and fragile. I picked it up carefully. The headline sent a jolt of electricity through me. Local teen survives devastating house fire. The article was about the Jenkins family. It said the fire was a tragic accident, but one sentence at the very end made us both freeze. Mark took the clipping from my trembling hands and read the sentence out loud, his voice a horrified whisper. Fire investigators noted that the blaze spread quickly from the garage, where the family car's brake lines had been mysteriously severed, preventing it from being moved away from the encroaching flames. He looked up at me, his face as white as a sheet. "Sandra," he said, his voice cracking. Liam's father was a mechanic. Liam worked in his shop every day after school. He knew exactly how to cut the brake lines on a car. The world tilted. For a whole year, I had painted a picture of Liam in my head. He was the man who broke my heart, the weak man who fell for my sister's lies. But the idea that he was something else, something much worse, had never crossed my mind. The thought that his hands, the same hands I had held and trusted, might have been capable of such a dark and violent act. It made me sick. Was our entire relationship, our whole history, built on a secret so terrible it could burn a whole family's life to the ground? Mark and I just stared at each other, the same horrified question in our eyes. Was Liam a monster, too? Or was he just another one of Amelia's victims? A teenage boy she had manipulated into doing something horrible? The video he sent me suddenly felt different. His fear, his shame. Was it about the affair, or was it about this? He was running, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't just running from Amelia. He was running from what they did together all those years ago. The blackmail wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. Suddenly, we heard a floorboard creak downstairs. Then another. Footsteps were coming up the stairs, slow and heavy. We were trapped. My heart hammered against my ribs. We were in my sister's room, holding evidence of a potential crime, and my parents were right downstairs. I quickly shoved the yearbook and the newspaper clipping into my purse just as the bedroom door swung open. It was my mother. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and etched with a deep sadness I had never seen before. She looked at us, then at the empty space on the bookshelf, and simply sighed. "I knew you'd look for it eventually," she said, her voice raspy with exhaustion. She wasn't angry. All the fight seemed to have gone out of her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "I always knew there was a darkness in her, Sandra. Even when she was a little girl. She was possessive. If she wanted a toy, she'd get it, even if she had to break another child's to do it." She took a shaky breath. "I was just so afraid of it, I pretended it wasn't there. It was easier to protect her than to face the truth. It was the confession I had waited my whole life to hear. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something more important. It was the truth. That fire." My mother continued, her gaze distant. "It changed everything. The Jenkins family left town right after. They sent Sarah away to live with her aunt, Catherine Pierce, over in Northwood. They said the trauma was too much for her. She was never the same girl after that night. My mother looked me directly in the eye. Protecting Amelia was a mistake. It almost let her destroy you. Don't let her story destroy anyone else. She gave us the key we needed. A name and a place. Catherine Pierce. Northwood. We left the house without another word, walking out into a day that felt too bright for the darkness we were carrying. We got into Mark's car, the newspaper clipping in my purse feeling like a 50-pound weight. We were no longer just chasing a story about a ruined wedding. We were chasing a crime. We were looking for justice for a girl whose name we had only learned an hour ago. The 2-hour drive to Northwood was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Mark finally broke the quiet as we saw the town sign for Northwood. He was trapped, he said, thinking out loud. Liam was trapped. Amelia had this secret over him for 15 years. She probably used it to control him, to make him do whatever she wanted. The affair. Maybe it wasn't about love at all. Maybe it was just another form of control. His theory made a terrifying kind of sense. Liam hadn't just cheated on me. He had been a prisoner in a cage built by my sister a long time ago. Using his phone, Mark found an address for a Catherine Pierce in Northwood. It was in a quiet, older neighborhood with large oak trees lining the streets. It looked peaceful, normal. It felt wrong to bring our ugly story to a place like this. My hands were shaking as Mark pulled the car over to the curb in front of a small, well-kept house with a garden full of flowers. For a moment, we just sat there, staring at the front door. Were we ready to hear what was on the other side? Were we ready to open a wound that had been closed for 15 years? We have to, Mark said, as if reading my mind. We got out of the car and walked up the stone path, each step feeling heavier than the last. This was it. The moment of truth. We were about to knock on a stranger's door and ask her about the worst day of her life. I took a deep breath, raised my hand, and prepared to knock. But I never got the chance. Before my knuckles could even touch the wood, the door swung open. A woman stood there, maybe in her late 50s, with kind eyes that held a deep sadness. She looked at me, then at Mark, and her expression changed. It wasn't surprise. It was a strange, weary recognition. A shiver went down my spine. How could she possibly know who we were? I had a feeling you'd come, she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. She looked right at me. I've been waiting for someone from your family to show up for a very long time. How could she have been waiting for us? The question pounded in my head, making it hard to breathe. We had just learned her name an hour ago. We had just found this house. It felt like we had stepped out of our world and into a ghost story, one that had been written for us long before we ever knew we were in it. The woman's eyes were not surprised or angry. They were just tired, as if she had been holding her breath for 15 years and had only just let it out. Her name was Catherine Pierce, and she invited us inside. Her home was neat and quiet, filled with the scent of lemon polish and old books. She led us to a small living room. Photos of a smiling older couple sat on the mantel, but there were no pictures of a teenage girl. "Please sit down," she said, her voice gentle. She saw the confusion on our faces and decided to explain. "I wasn't waiting for you two, specifically. I was waiting for what you represent. Sarah always said that one day, your sister would finally go too far. She said Amelia's evil was like a fire that couldn't stop burning until it destroyed everything around her, including herself." I sank into an armchair, the stuffing feeling thin beneath me. Sarah had predicted this. She knew, even as a teenager, that my sister's darkness would eventually lead to a day like yesterday. "What did she do?" Catherine asked, her voice filled with a weary resignation. Mark, in a low, steady voice, told her everything. The stolen dress, the affair with Liam, the pregnancy, the blackmail, and the final horrifying plan to send me to prison. Catherine listened without interruption, just nodding slowly. Nothing we said seemed to shock her. It was as if she were listening to the end of a story she had already read. "I need to talk to her," I said, leaning forward. "Please. I need to talk to Sarah." Catherine's kind eyes filled with a deep and sudden sadness. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. You can't." My heart dropped. Sarah passed away 5 years ago. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. We were too late. The person we had come to save, the victim whose story we were trying to uncover, was gone. Our mission wasn't to save her, it was to get justice for her. "What happened?" Mark asked gently. "The fire. It broke something inside her," Catherine explained, a tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. She was diagnosed with severe anxiety. She was always afraid, always looking over her shoulder. She moved from town to town, job to job, never feeling safe. She believed Amelia would find her and finish what she started. She told us the official cause of Sarah's death was a car accident on a rainy night, but Catherine never believed it was that simple. She lived her whole life in fear of your sister. In a way, Amelia killed her long before that night. Catherine then stood up and walked to an old wooden desk in the corner. Sarah knew no one would believe her story, so she wrote it all down. She left me her journals, so the truth would have a safe place to live. She returned with a worn, leather-bound book and placed it on the coffee table between us. She wanted the world to know what really happened. Why Amelia did what she did. She opened the journal, its pages yellowed with age, and the story of my sister's first great crime finally came to light. It wasn't about a boy. It was about a scholarship. A prestigious summer program in Europe for gifted high school students. Sarah had been chosen. Amelia, who prided herself on being the smartest girl in school, was the runner-up. In Sarah's journal, she described how Amelia's jealousy turned into something ugly. She pretended to be happy for her best friend, but she would make chilling little comments in private. "It would be a shame if you got sick and couldn't go," she'd say with a smile. "I'd be happy to take your place." The night of the fire was laid out in terrifying detail. Liam, who Amelia had already been secretly seeing, had come over that afternoon. He was supposed to be fixing Sarah's brother's bicycle chain in the garage. That must have been when he cut the brake lines. Later that night, Sarah woke up choking on smoke. The fire started in the garage. "It wasn't meant to kill them," Sarah wrote. "It was meant to create chaos and trauma, to turn her life upside down so she would be too distracted and broken to accept the scholarship." The plan worked perfectly. The Jenkins family lost everything they owned. Overwhelmed with grief and trauma, Sarah officially gave up her spot in the summer program. Her family, now homeless, had to move, and Sarah was sent to live with her Aunt Catherine. And the person who was next in line for the scholarship, the one who took Sarah's place and spent a perfect summer in Europe living the life she had stolen, was my sister, Amelia. The story was so petty, so cruel, so much worse than I could have ever imagined. Catherine closed the journal, the silence in the room heavy with the ghosts of the past. Sarah told the police she thought Amelia was involved, but they just saw a traumatized girl pointing fingers at her popular, perfect best friend. No one listened. Catherine looked at me, her eyes intense. But she didn't just leave me the journals. She left one other thing. She stood up and walked towards a locked wooden chest in the corner of the room. She left a small box. She told me to keep it safe and to give it to the first person from your family who came looking for the truth. She said you would know what to do with it. A story can be a weapon. A memory can be a ghost. For 15 years, the story of Sarah Jenkins had been a ghost, haunting only the people who knew the truth. But we were about to be handed something real. Something solid. My sister was a master of twisting words and playing with emotions. You can argue with a story. You can dismiss a memory. But you can't argue with proof. I held my breath as Catherine knelt and turned a small brass key in the lock. The click echoed in the silent room. Catherine lifted the lid of the chest and pulled out a small, simple wooden box, the kind you might keep jewelry in. She held it in her hands for a moment, her knuckles white. Sarah was so smart, Catherine said, her voice full of a sad pride. She knew her journals were just her words. She knew that in a fight against your sisters, perfect reputation. A story wasn't enough. She needed something that Amelia couldn't deny. Something she couldn't lie her way out of. She stood up and held the box out to me. She wanted you to have this. My hands trembled as I took it. It was surprisingly light. It felt wrong that something so small could hold the truth to so much pain. This box held the last wish of a girl I never got to meet, a final plea for justice sent from beyond the grave. Mark placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, his presence a silent source of strength. I took a deep breath, looked at him, and then slowly lifted the lid. For a second, I almost didn't understand what I was looking at. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a silver Zippo-style lighter. It was tarnished with age and slightly dented, with dark scorch marks on one side as if it had been touched by fire. It wasn't just any lighter, though. I leaned closer and saw the engraving on the side, a fancy loopy script that I recognized instantly from years of birthday cards and Christmas presents. It was my sister's signature handwriting, and it spelled out her name, Amelia. This was it. The smoking gun. The one piece of evidence that proved she was there that night. It was a gift from your parents for her 16th birthday, Catherine explained softly, seeing the look on my face. She thought it was so cool. She carried it everywhere, even though she didn't smoke. Catherine's voice was filled with the memory of Sarah's pain. A week after the fire, when they let Sarah go back to look for anything that might have survived, she found it. It was in the ashes of the garage, hidden under a pile of burnt debris. She knew whose it was the second she saw it. She cleaned it off and kept it, her one terrible secret. I closed the lid, the click sounding final and absolute. We had it. We had the proof. A 15-year-old crime, a life lived in fear, and a suspicious death. It all led back to this little metal box. What do we do now? I asked, looking at Mark. Do we go to the police? It's been so long. Will they even listen? The real world, with its rules and its laws, suddenly felt very complicated. We had the truth, but would that be enough to get justice? There's one more thing, Catherine said, leaning forward. After Sarah died, I went to the police myself. I tried to get them to reopen the investigation into the fire. I told them everything Sarah had written in her journals. They dismissed me, said it was just the grief talking. She paused, her eyes locking with mine. But there was one young detective who listened. He told me that without physical evidence, his hands were tied. But he believed me. His name was Miller, and he told me if I ever found anything real, anything solid, to bring it straight to him. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. A name. A possible ally. Mark was already on his phone. Detective Miller. He murmured, typing furiously. He's still there. He's a lieutenant now. Head of the county sheriff's department. Our path, which had been so dark and confusing, was suddenly clear. We had the proof, and now we had a destination. We stood up, and I hugged Catherine tightly. Thank you, I whispered. We will get justice for her. I promise. For the first time, a small, hopeful smile touched Catherine's lips. We got back in the car, a new energy crackling between us. I placed the small wooden box on the dashboard, a silent promise sitting between me and Mark. This was about more than my ruined wedding. It was about Sarah. It was about the fire. It was about stopping a monster who wore my sister's face. She has to be stopped for good, Mark said, his voice hard as stone. She's not just a narcissist, she's dangerous. As he spoke, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a text from my mother. My blood ran cold as I read the words. Sandra, come home. Amelia is gone. She packed a bag this morning while we were sleeping and took her car. We don't know where she is. She was on the run. She must have known somehow that the walls were closing in. She wasn't going to wait for the consequences. She was trying to escape them. The clock was now ticking. We had to get to the police before she disappeared forever. Mark put the car in drive, his foot pressing hard on the gas. We're going to the sheriff's department. Right now, he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I nodded, my heart pounding. But just as I was about to put my phone away, the screen lit up again. A new message. This one was from a number I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it. There was no greeting, no explanation. Just a single, chilling sentence. I know you found it. You and the dentist should sleep with one eye open. Fear is a funny thing. For a moment, when I read that text, my blood turned to ice. She knew. She was watching us. But then, something else took over. A hot, bright anger. All my life, I had been afraid of my sister. Afraid of her moods, her jealousy, her anger. But now, I was done being afraid. That text wasn't just a threat. It was a mistake. It was the last piece of proof we needed. Mark looked at me, his jaw tight with anger, not fear. She's not scaring us away, he said. She's just telling us we're winning. We drove straight to the county sheriff's department. The building looked big and intimidating, but for the first time, I felt like the law was on my side. We walked in and asked for Lieutenant Miller. He was an older man with tired eyes that had seen too much. He led us to his small, cluttered office. I took a deep breath and I told him everything. I started with my stolen wedding dress and ended with the text message that had arrived just 10 minutes before. I told him about Sarah, the fire, and Liam. Then, I placed the small wooden box on his desk and opened it. Lieutenant Miller listened to the whole story without saying a word. When I was finished, he picked up the lighter from the box, turning it over and over in his hand. He stared at the name, Amelia, engraved on the side. The Jenkins case, he said, his voice a low rumble. I never forgot that one. I always knew there was something wrong. He looked from the lighter to my phone, where Amelia's threat was still on the screen. He picked up his desk phone. This is Miller. I need a bolo issued immediately for Amelia Dorr. She's a primary person of interest in a 15-year-old arson case, and she is now considered armed and dangerous. As his team started working, Miller asked me more questions about Liam. I told him about the video, and how Liam had run away. What's his last name? Miller asked. Mark provided it. Miller typed the name into his computer. He was silent for a long moment, just staring at his screen. Well, he said, turning to look at us. It seems your ex-fiancé wasn't just a victim in all this. He had a juvenile record. Breaking and entering. Theft. This new detail made my stomach twist. Liam wasn't just a cheater. He had a history of being a criminal, too. Amelia didn't just manipulate him. She found a partner. Just then, Lieutenant Miller's desk phone rang again. He answered it, listening intently. His face went pale. Where? He asked. Okay. Secure the scene. Don't let anyone near it. He hung up the phone and looked at us, his professional calm finally breaking. We found your sister's car, he said, his voice grim. It was abandoned on the side of the highway about an hour from here. He paused, taking a deep breath. Amelia wasn't in the car, Sandra. Liam was. He's been shot. He's dead. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Liam hadn't just run away. Amelia had tied up her last loose end. She had silenced the only other person who knew the truth about that fire. Her plan was more evil than I could have imagined. She forced Liam to make that confession video to paint himself as the guilty one who ran. Then she took back the blackmail money, and she killed him. The text message wasn't a warning. It was a victory lap. She was telling me she had cleaned up her mess, and I was next on her list. The story exploded. With Liam's murder now connected to the old arson case, every police officer in the state was looking for my sister. The local news channels broke into their regular programs with the story. They showed Amelia's smiling wedding picture, the one taken just hours before her world came crashing down. But now, underneath her perfect face, were the words, "Wanted for murder." I stood with Mark, watching the TV screen in the sheriff's lobby. It was over. The truth was out. And at that moment, I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt a deep, profound relief for a girl named Sarah Jenkins. A few months have passed. Amelia was caught by police trying to use a fake ID to get on a bus to Canada. They found the gun she used to kill Liam in her suitcase. With the lighter, the journals, and all the other evidence, she will spend the rest of her life in prison. I stand here now, in front of a grave I visit often. It says, Sarah Jenkins. I place a bouquet of her favorite flowers, daisies, on the grass. It's over, Sarah, I whisper to the quiet stone. You can finally rest now. A car door closes softly behind me. It's Mark. He walks up and stands beside me, his presence comfortable and familiar. We went through a war together, and it created a bond stronger than anything I've ever known. It's not a romance, not yet, but it is a deep and true friendship. He gently takes my hand. What now? He asks. I look away from the grave and towards the setting sun, a beautiful mix of orange and purple painting the sky. A new beginning. Now, I say, squeezing his hand. We live. My sister tried to burn down my life, just like she did to Sarah's. But from the ashes, something new can grow. She tried to bury the truth under years of lies, but the truth eventually, always finds its way into the light. My story is over, but there are so many others out there who need justice. Thank you for being a part of this journey. If you believe that truth and justice should always win, please like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Your support helps give a voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for watching.